Sometimes you think you've reached the end of happiness, until the person who once vowed to stay by your side for life throws you out of your own home, all because of something you can't control. 20 years of marriage, and on one rainy night in Seattle, she hears the man she loves say, "You're a barren woman." But who could have imagined that from the very moment she was abandoned, a new life would begin? This is the story of Emma Hayes, a woman who lost everything, only to find herself again in a rain-soaked American city. If you've ever believed that life is nothing but darkness, stay with this journey, because sometimes true light only appears when we've hit rock bottom. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss this 10-part journey of tears, love, and rebirth. The story begins now. Seattle was colder than usual that night. The rain fell without pause, soft, steady, as if it wanted to wash away every trace of the fading day. In a villa perched on a slope overlooking Lake Washington, the warm yellow light shone through thick glass windows, spilling over a white-covered dining table where an anniversary dinner for 20 years of marriage had just turned to ashes. Emma Hayes sat across from Richard Blake, the man who had once been her whole youth, now holding a glass of wine with a cold, distant gaze clouded like mist. On the table, dinner sat untouched, the steak gone cold, the candles burned down to their base, thin smoke curling around the wedding ring still on Emma's finger. "I can't keep doing this anymore," Richard said, his voice low and sharp as steel. 20 years, Emma. 20 years, and you still can't do the simplest thing, give me a child." She flinched. Even after years of hearing his reproaches, something inside her still broke. Outside, the rain drummed softly on the roof, sounding almost like someone weeping. "Richard," she whispered, her voice trembling, "we've tried. So many times. You know that." "Tried?" He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Tried and failed. Please don't say we. You failed, not me." His words sliced through the air like a blade, and Emma fell silent, her throat tightening. She looked at the man before her tailored suit, perfect tie, the image of success admired by everyone. Only she knew that behind that polished exterior lay a barren heart and an ego too proud to face the truth. I don't know whose fault it is," she murmured. "Maybe we should both get tested again." Richard slammed his glass onto the table. It shattered the silence with a hard crack. Red wine splattered across the white cloth, blooming like blood. "Are you implying it's my fault?" Emma said nothing. No, she didn't dare, or rather, she was too tired to fight. He stood, circling the table. The chandelier light reflected off his angular face, handsome, but cruelly cold. "I've given you everything, Emma. A home, a car, a name, and what have you given me in return? A silent house and humiliation." She bowed her head, fingers twisting together. "I tried, Richard. I really did." He laughed again, a dry, cutting sound. "Tried? You live off my money, not your effort. Don't fool yourself." In that moment, something flickered in Emma's eyes, a fragile mix of despair and awakening. She had endured too much, swallowed too many words. A part of her still hoped he'd soften, remember the woman who once stood beside him through their youth, through those hungry, hopeful days in a tiny apartment. But that man was long gone, replaced by someone consumed by pride and legacy. She rose quietly and set her napkin down. "If you think I'm useless, then maybe you should let me go." Richard froze, then burst out laughing. "Go? You think you can survive without me?" Emma didn't answer. She only looked at him calmly, almost eerily so. For the first time, Richard sensed something slipping beyond his control. "You're not going anywhere," he said, voice hard. "This is my house." "Yes," she nodded softly. "Your house." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Then, with a violent motion, Richard hurled the glass to the floor. It shattered into pieces. He strode to the closet, pulled out her suitcase, and began throwing clothes inside, each motion a strike meant to erase her existence. "Get out, tonight." Emma looked at him, her eyes dry. Perhaps when a heart shatters deeply enough, tears stop coming. She put on her coat, slipped into her shoes, and pulled the suitcase toward the door. The wheels scraped against the wooden floor, a hollow, dragging sound. "You really want it to end like this?" she asked, her voice calm, almost too quiet. Richard didn't look at her. It ended long ago. Outside, the rain grew heavier. The wind lashed against the windows as if even the night itself wanted to stop her. Emma stepped out, dragging her suitcase down the wet stone steps. The sound of the door closing behind her was final, a period marking the end of 20 years of her youth. She walked through the grey rain, each step heavy with heartbreak. The suitcase rattled on the pavement, click-clack, like the ticking of a clock counting down what remained. Streetlights shimmered through puddles, reflecting her shadow small, trembling, but still moving forward. Rain and tears mingled on her face. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew that if she stopped, she would fall apart. Seattle, the city of rain, seemed to mourn a marriage's death that night. The wind cut through her coat, carrying the salt of the bay. Emma stopped at Gasworks Park, their favorite spot when life was simple. Now, under the dim yellow glow of the lamps, everything was just memory. She sat on a bench, suitcase beside her. Her hair clung wet to her face, makeup washed away, leaving only the raw, pale truth of exhaustion and an eerie peace. She thought of the 20 years, mornings making coffee for him, nights spent waiting for pregnancy results, cold words she swallowed to preserve the image of a perfect home. Now, all of it dissolved in the rain. A black car pulled up nearby. Its door opened, spilling white light into the grey mist. A tall man stepped out, wearing a dark coat and holding an umbrella in his hand. Emma. She looked up. That voice, it struck her heart. Ethan, she breathed, barely believing her eyes. He smiled faintly, blue eyes glinting with quiet surprise. I almost didn't recognize you. I didn't expect to see you here, she said, voice hoarse. He glanced at her soaked clothes, trembling hands. It's freezing. You shouldn't be out here. Come on, get in the car. I'm fine. Emma, he interrupted gently but firmly. Please, get in. She hesitated, then stood. When he took her suitcase, one wheel snapped with a tiny click. That slight sound pierced her heart. Perhaps no one had shown her such simple kindness in 20 years. The car glided through the rain-soaked streets. Streetlights flickered across Emma's face, the face of someone who had lost everything. Yet in her eyes, a faint spark began to glow. Ethan took her to his apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, where the city blurred through the rain. It was warm, peaceful, almost unreal. He handed her a towel, poured her hot tea, and sat across from her, saying nothing. She stared into the steaming cup, the tendrils of vapor mingling with the patter of rain outside. Do you want to know what happened? She asked softly. He shook his head. Only if you want to tell me. A long silence. Then Emma began to speak. Fragments of her story spilled out: the insults, the empty nights, the loneliness inside that beautiful house. And finally, tonight, the night he threw her out. Ethan didn't interrupt. Sometimes he poured more tea. Sometimes he just placed his hand on hers to warm it. His eyes gentle, understanding never wavered. When she finished, silence returned, thick and full. Ethan finally spoke, his voice low and quiet. You know, when I was 17, I promised myself that if I ever got the chance, I'd never let anyone treat you that way. She looked up, tears welling. Ethan, he gave a small, sad smile. I'm not saying this to make you remember. I want you to know you deserve love, Emma. You deserve so much more than what he ever made you believe. And for the first time in 20 years, she cried not from pain, but because someone reminded her she was still worthy. Outside, the rain kept falling. But in that warm room, between two people who had once lost each other, something began to bloom again, small and fragile, like a candle newly lit in the cold night. The next morning, the rain still hadn't stopped. A dim grey light filtered through the windows, glistening on the droplets that clung to the curtains. Seattle had never known a day without dampness, but inside that high-rise apartment, something felt different. A quiet safety, a soft calm like the first breath after a storm. Emma woke on the sofa, wrapped in a warm blanket. The air smelled of roasted coffee and toasted bread. She opened her eyes, taking in the room, the glass wall overlooking Elliott Bay, small boats drifting lazily through the mist. Everything seemed distant, blurred, but peaceful. Ethan stood by the kitchen counter, a coffee mug in his hand, sleeves rolled up, his hair still damp. When he turned and smiled, Emma felt her heart flutter, just like the girl she once was, 20 years ago, the first time she saw him in the high school hallway. Some people, no matter how much time covers them in dust, still make you feel safe. You're awake? He asked, his voice deep and warm. "Yeah, I'm sorry for bothering you last night." Ethan shook his head. "Don't say that. If you hadn't knocked on my door, I might never have had the chance to see you again." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes after a long night of tears. "You still live in Seattle?" "I do. My company's based here. I work in tech, it's nothing special." "Sounds pretty special to me," she said, her tone lighter now. He chuckled, then poured her a cup of coffee. "Here, drink this, it'll make you feel better." End. Emma wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. In 20 years, no one had handed her a morning coffee with that kind of gentle look. "Are you married?" she asked, hesitating. Ethan sat across from her, shaking his head. "No, maybe I'm not ready, or maybe I just haven't met the right person." "After all these years?" "After all these years," he said with a faint smile. "What about you? 20 years is a long time. Do you ever regret it?" Emma fell quiet. She didn't know where to begin. Regret? Maybe. But what hurt most wasn't marrying Richard. It was losing herself along the way. "I used to think, if I were more patient, if I loved harder, maybe things would be different," she said softly. "But love can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, can it?" Ethan looked at her, eyes heavy with understanding. "No. And none of it was your fault." The room fell into a long silence, broken only by the rain tapping against the glass. "I still remember," Ethan said quietly, "the day you left Portland. I was going to see you off at the airport, but I didn't make it in time. At the time, I thought you'd forgotten me," she said with a faint smile. "I didn't," he replied. "I just didn't have the courage. You were so radiant, Emma. I thought someone like you would have everything." She lowered her head, her smile wavering. "I thought so too." He didn't say anything more. He just reached out, his fingers brushing hers silent comfort. That simple touch made her chest tighten, not because of love, but because she suddenly remembered what it felt like to be cared for. That morning drifted by like a fragile dream. When Emma started to leave, Ethan held her coat and asked, "Where will you go now?" "I'm not sure. Maybe I'll stay at a hotel for a few days. There's a spare room here, if you don't mind." There were. She looked up, ready to refuse, but his eyes were so honest, she couldn't. "Thank you," was all she could say. He nodded gently. "No need to thank me. You once made me believe life could be softer. Let me return the favor, Emma." Outside, the rain still fell, but something warm began to stir inside her, as if, amid the cold streets of Seattle, she had found a small shelter. By evening, the city lights shimmered across the water, painting streaks of gold and amber on the bay. Emma stood by the window, a cup of ginger tea in hand, watching the wind ripple through the waves. Ethan was on a call nearby, his voice calm, steady, the voice of a man who'd seen failure enough times to learn serenity. When he hung up, she asked, "Are you always this calm?" He smiled. "Not really. I just learn to breathe slower whenever my heart feels like it might break." She nodded thoughtfully. "I wish I'd learned that sooner." They fell quiet for a while. On the table were 2 plates of spaghetti he'd made himself. Emma was surprised he remembered back in high school. It had been her favorite dish at their graduation party. The scent of butter, garlic, and oregano filled the room, blending with the sound of the rain to create a rare kind of warmth. "It's excellent," she said softly. "Glad you still think so. I remember you used to say you'd open an Italian restaurant someday." Ethan laughed. "Yeah, and I ended up an engineer. Life doesn't always go as planned." His words made Emma look at him for a long moment. It was true, life never went as planned. Who would have thought the man who threw her out in the rain would cease to matter, and the boy she once knew would become the only place she felt safe? After dinner, they sat on the sofa. The city lights shimmered across their faces, soft and golden. Ethan told old stories about their strict teacher, the time he almost got expelled for standing up for her. Emma laughed out loud, freely, for the first time in years. "You know," she said quietly, "I'd forgotten what it feels like to laugh like this." "Then you should practice," he replied. "Laughter is a kind of courage too." His voice was gentle but deep, every word landing somewhere tender inside her. The night grew late. The rain left long trails down the windows, as if time itself were refusing to stop. Emma sat still, listening to a faint jazz tune from the speaker, an old version of "Someone Like You." Ethan poured another glass of wine and handed it to her. "A toast to what's gone, and to what remains." She clinked her glass with his, meeting his gaze. In his eyes, there was no pity, only a quiet, kind understanding. "Ethan, yeah? Do you think a person can love again after they've been broken?" He looked at her for a moment, then said softly, "No one is ever truly broken, Emma. They're just waiting for someone gentle enough to touch what's still whole." His words left her silent. After a while, she set down her glass and whispered, "I'm scared. Scared to trust, to love, to be left again." "I know," Ethan murmured, "but sometimes all we need is to believe in something small. The sun will rise tomorrow, and that someone will still be here, even if you're not perfect." She turned to him, the golden light caught in his blue eyes, and in that moment, Emma felt her heart tremble softly, but enough to remind her she was still alive, still capable of feeling warmth. Ethan did nothing more than rest his hand gently on her shoulder. The touch made her cry tears of release, not pain. Outside, the rain kept falling, but somewhere in the city, the first light of dawn began to meet the drops. Emma leaned her head on his shoulder. Ethan said nothing, just stayed still as if he understood that sometimes silence is the kindest language two people can share. That night, she fell asleep in a peace she hadn't known in 20 years. 3 weeks after that fateful night in the rain, the Seattle sky seemed a little less cold. The rain still fell, but softer now, like steady breathing after a fever. Emma stood by the window of Ethan's apartment, holding a cup of coffee, her eyes tracing the wet trees below. She still wasn't used to mornings like this, no Richard grumbling, no heavy silence pressing down, no invisible guilt hanging over her. This morning was hers, entirely. In the days since, she had been sleeping better, eating better, and sometimes even smiling at something Ethan said. He never asked her to talk about the past. He existed beside her, a gentle, steady presence that asked for nothing. On the table lay a thick envelope, the divorce papers. Richard's lawyer had sent them, asking for her signature. She stared at the stack of documents, her chest heavy, but her hands steady. She had signed countless papers over 20 years, bills, contracts, forms, but never one that meant something she chose for herself. This one meant freedom. Ethan came up behind her, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Are you ready?" She nodded. "Yes. For the first time in my life, I think I really am." "Well." She sat down, took a deep breath, and signed Emma Hayes Blake. The ink trembled slightly but held firm. As she set the pen down, she felt an invisible chain finally break after 20 long years. Ethan said nothing. He poured her a cup of ginger tea and slid it toward her. "Drink. Freedom should start with something warm." Emma smiled, a small, fragile smile, but a real one. In the days that followed, she began to step outside again. She walked along the harbor, stopped by the little cafes Richard used to call cheap, and sat by the window, reading and watching people pass. Seattle looked just as beautiful as it had when she first moved there. She had just been too busy pleasing someone else to notice. One morning, Ethan asked, "So, what will you do next?" "I don't know yet," she said, her eyes shining with a rare honesty. "For 20 years, I lived for someone else. Maybe now, I need to learn how to live for myself." "No," Ethan nodded. "I'll help. Not with advice, just with coffee mornings and unplanned afternoons." She laughed softly. "That sounds like a perfect plan," he shrugged, "because sometimes healing isn't in doing something big. It's in small things like a day when you don't have to be strong." His words lingered. Emma thought of the mornings in that perfect, expensive house, everything spotless, lifeless, cold. Now, in Ethan's modest apartment, she finally knew what it meant to breathe. She began to paint again. The first pieces were messy, off balance, uncertain, but color returned to her fingertips, the blue of the bay, the gray of the sky, the soft gold of quiet hope. Ethan hung her paintings on the wall without comment, only saying, "Each one is a piece of you finding its way back." At night, they listened to jazz or gentle acoustic songs, talking about small things, favorite meals, old music, foolish memories. Emma was surprised by how often she found herself laughing. One evening, as the city lights shimmered through the glass, she asked softly, "Ethan, do you ever regret it? Not telling me back then?" He looked at her. "The day you married Richard, I stood outside the church." She froze. "I didn't go in because I didn't want to ruin your happiness. I told myself that if I smiled while walking beside him, then my silence was the right choice." But when I saw you crying after the ceremony, I knew I was wrong. Just too late. Ah. Emma looked down, her heart tightening. I wish you'd walked in. Ethan reached across and brushed her hand. I think I finally did. Just 20 years later. Outside, the rain had started again, but this time, it didn't feel cold. By April, Seattle was blooming with cherry blossoms that lined the path around Green Lake. Emma and Ethan walked beneath the pink canopy, petals swirling through the wind like a warm snowfall. Look, Emma said, holding her palm out to catch a few petals. It's like snow but softer. Ethan smiled. Because snow falls to end things, flowers fall to begin them. His words made her pause. 20 years of marriage had taught her how to stay silent, but now she was learning to listen again, not to others, but to her own heart. They stopped by a small lakeside cafe. The Italian owner, an older woman with kind eyes, looked at Emma and said, "Signora, you have the eyes of someone born again." Ethan turned to her and said quietly, "She's right." "Oh." Emma blushed, laughing. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had said something like that to her. In those days, she began keeping a journal, writing down tiny moments, ordinary feelings, and all the details she had once overlooked. Each line felt like a mirror reflecting who she really was. A woman no longer defined by being a wife or a would-be mother, but simply herself. One evening, while they sat together in the living room, Ethan opened his laptop and showed her something. "I'm investing in a small local art gallery," he said. "I want you to be the curator." Her eyes widened. "Me? Yes. You have an eye for beauty and a heart that knows how to tell a story. That's what real art needs." Emma chuckled softly. "Do you always believe in people this easily?" He smiled. "No, only in those who found their way back to themselves." Her throat tightened. After 20 years of being told she was useless, hearing someone say, "I believe in you," was enough to bring tears to her eyes. One morning, her lawyer called the divorce was finalized. Richard had agreed to everything. No arguments, no conditions. Just one short message, "I hope you find what I couldn't give you." Emma stared at the words for a long time, then deleted the message. No anger, no grief, just emptiness, like looking at a door that had closed for good. That afternoon, Ethan drove her to the pier. They stood together, watching seagulls glide across the grey sky. "Finally," he said, "sometimes endings aren't about losing, Emma. They're about getting yourself back." She nodded. "Maybe. From now on, I'll live like I was never caged." Ethan turned to her, gently taking her hand. "And I'll be here to make sure you never forget what freedom looks like." The wind carried the salt of the sea. She closed her eyes, breathing it in. For the first time in her life, her breath no longer tasted bitter. In her heart, she knew the ashes had cooled and the light was returning. By June, Seattle had finally eased its rain. The rare sunlight spilled across the streets by the bay, and the city seemed to change its skin, and so did Emma. She was no longer the quiet woman hiding in the shadows of her past. Every morning, she left the apartment early, stopping by Queen Anne Brew, where the barista always greeted her with a smile. "Cappuccino, no sugar, right?" Ethan was usually there already, with his laptop, his black coffee, and that calm, steady gaze. One morning, he looked up from his screen as she walked in. "Good morning, my artist." She laughed softly. "Is that a real compliment, or are you teasing me?" "Both," he said, smiling. "You're talented, and I'm just lucky." "Well," her cheeks flushed, and she said nothing. But inside, something delicate stirred, fragile, warm, alive. She'd begun working at the small art gallery Ethan had invested in. The space sat quietly on a side street near Pike Place, filled with local artists' work, simple but pulsing with life. There, Emma rediscovered herself, a woman who loved color and who valued honesty in art and in her feelings. In the afternoons, she often stayed late, adjusting frames, rearranging displays, or simply watching the sunlight fade across the wall. Sometimes Ethan showed up early, bringing her coffee and warm waffles. "You're early," she'd say. "I was worried you'd forget to eat." "I'm not that fragile." "I know," he'd smile. "But I came anyway." Little things like that, gentle words, quiet gestures, fell between them day by day, creating ripples of unnamed affection. Sometimes Emma wondered, was this love or just gratitude? But every time Ethan smiled at her, the kind of smile that seemed to warm the entire room, she knew her heart had already answered. That night, they attended the opening of Emma's first exhibition as curator. She wore a soft, blue silk dress, her hair loose and flowing over her shoulders. Ethan couldn't stop staring until she laughed. "What are you looking at?" "I'm just trying to understand how someone can still be this beautiful after so much pain." His voice caught her off guard, not because of the words, but because of the way he said them. Slow, sincere, as if each one came straight from his heart. The event was a resounding success, exceeding expectations. People congratulated her. Some even asked to buy her painting. First Light, the one Ethan had always said carried a piece of your soul. When the crowd thinned, Ethan took her hand and said softly, "Do you know, I've waited a long time for this moment." "What moment?" "The moment you smiled, without needing anyone's permission." She looked at him, the golden light glinting across his face, and her heartbeat quickened. She didn't speak, just squeezed his hand, the silence between them, saying what words couldn't. That night, they walked around Green Lake. The moon shimmered on the water, its glow soft as silk. Crickets and wind blended into a quiet symphony between them. Ethan stopped and turned to her. "Emma, there's something I've wanted to say for a long time." She looked up. "I love you." No music, no fireworks, just 3 simple words beneath the quiet Seattle sky. Yet to Emma, it struck like thunder, waking a heart that had long been asleep. She didn't answer right away. Tears slid down her cheeks, glinting in the moonlight. "I don't know if I can love again," she whispered. "Then let me believe for you," he said gently. "Just let me stay." And she stepped into his arms, not a passionate embrace, but one of 2 souls who had wandered too long through storms and finally found shelter. The next morning, sunlight flooded through every pane of glass in the apartment. Emma woke early to the birds outside the balcony. Ethan was already up, making coffee and toast. He said little, only set a cappuccino and a folded newspaper in front of her. "Good news," he said. "What kind of news?" "Your exhibition's featured in Seattle Art Weekly. They called you the storyteller in color." Emma laughed, though her eyes glistened. 20 years ago, she'd thought she was only good at cleaning, cooking, and keeping quiet. Now, someone called her a storyteller. She felt as if she'd been born again. Ethan looked at her, his gaze soft, proud. "Told you the light was always in you. You just needed someone to help you see it." And she was about to answer when her phone buzzed an unknown number. "Miss Hayes," a man's voice said, "this is Dr. Wells from the fertility clinic. We've reviewed your old records, and I believe there's been a serious mistake." Emma froze. "Mistake?" she repeated. "I shouldn't go into detail over the phone," he said, "but you should come in. It appears your earlier diagnosis was wrong. In fact, your fertility is completely normal." Her hands trembled, the coffee cup tipping, spilling across the table. Ethan rushed to her side, steadying her shoulders. "What happened?" he asked. Her voice broke. "They said I was never infertile." The room fell silent. Even the ticking of the clock felt deafening. Ethan tightened his grip on her hand. "Do you want me to come with you?" She nodded. That afternoon, they went to the clinic. Dr. Wells, a kindly-faced man with silver hair, opened his old file and spoke carefully. "The test from 20 years ago was incorrect. Your blood sample was mixed up with another patient's. I'm deeply sorry, but you were never infertile. You're perfectly healthy." Emma sat still. 20 years. 20 years of shame, of guilt, of being treated as broken because of one mistake. Dr. Wells went on, "In fact, if you ever wish to have children, it's still entirely possible." Emma covered her mouth as tears spilled uncontrollably. Ethan sat beside her, silent, eyes glistening. "I don't even know what to do with this truth," she whispered. "You don't have to do anything," he said softly. "Just believe that from now on, no one gets to tell you that you're not enough." She looked up at him, and in his eyes, she saw her reflection not as a wounded woman, but as someone reborn. Ethan smiled gently, wiping her tears. "Emma, I loved you even when you thought you couldn't, and I love you even more for the strength it took to believe you didn't deserve it. But the truth is you always did." Emma broke down again, but this time in the arms of real love. That evening, they returned to the apartment. The city lights shimmered across the water like scattered stars. Emma stood by the window, her hand unconsciously resting on her stomach. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You know," he murmured near her ear, "maybe God didn't want you to be a mother too soon because he wanted you to learn to love yourself first." And Emma turned to him, smiling through her tears. "And if one day a miracle happens," she whispered. "Then it'll be our miracle," he said. Outside, Seattle glowed against the night, as if the whole city was quietly bearing witness to a heart reborn. That morning, Seattle was obvious. Sunlight spilled over the grey rooftops, filtering through the blinds and casting a soft, golden hue over the apartment. Emma woke early to find Ethan in the kitchen, brewing coffee. He smiled as she stirred beneath the blanket. "Your morning's here," he said, handing her a cup of cappuccino, no sugar. She accepted it, then paused, frowning slightly. "The coffee smells stronger than usual." Ethan chuckled. "Same as yesterday." "No, it's not." She set the cup down and suddenly bolted for the bathroom. The sound of running water, then silence. Ethan knocked, worried. "Emma, you okay?" Her voice came out muffled, trembling. "I think I need to buy a test." He froze, a long, suspended second. Then, quietly, trying to keep his voice steady, "I'll go with you." 30 minutes later, they stood in a downtown pharmacy aisle, facing a row of pregnancy tests. Emma stared at them as if the world were spinning. 20 years ago, she had done this once, holding her breath, waiting, only to see one single line. That night, she'd cried until morning, while Richard sighed coldly and turned away. Now, Ethan brushed her shoulder lightly. "Hey, it's okay. Whatever happens, I'm here." She looked at him. There was something in his eyes, steady, gentle, that made her heart slow down. She grabbed a box, paid for it, and they drove home in silence. 10 minutes later, she came out of the bathroom. In her trembling hand, 2 red lines. She froze, tears spilling before she could even understand she was crying. Ethan stood there, eyes wide, breath caught. "Emma." She set the test on the table, unable to speak a word. He looked at it, then pulled her into his arms. No words, just the sound of their hearts. I'm pregnant," she whispered, disbelief trembling in her voice. Ethan smiled, joy breaking through the tears. "I know. I believed it from the start." She laughed softly through her crying. "How could you be so sure?" "Because you've always carried light inside you, and light is meant to create life." She cried harder tears of relief, of wonder, of grief, all at once. 20 years of being called barren, broken, worthless, and yet, her body had always held this quiet miracle inside. Every cruel word, every lie, it all faded like dust. Ethan held her close, whispering, "Thank you for believing in miracles, even when everyone told you not to." That afternoon, they went to the clinic. Dr. Wells smiled as he looked at the ultrasound results. "Congratulations to both of you," he said. "The baby's about 12 weeks along. Everything looks perfect." "Oh, Emma went still. 12 weeks. That meant she'd been pregnant even before learning the truth about her old diagnosis. When the small image appeared on the screen, tiny heartbeat flickering steadily, she gripped Ethan's hand tight. "Miss Hayes," the doctor continued, "your body is completely healthy. There's no sign of infertility. I can safely say you never were." Emma looked up, her voice small. "You mean?" He gave a gentle smile. "Let's just say the problem was never yours. What matters now is that you're healthy, and your baby's doing beautifully." She nodded, but his words rippled through her like an earthquake. If she'd never been infertile, if the fault had never been hers, then what had she suffered for all those years? Ethan saw the shadow cross her face. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't think about that," he said softly. "Today's only for joy." She turned toward him, eyes glistening. "You know, I never believed in miracles," she whispered. "But maybe you were mine." He smiled, kissing her forehead. "Miracles don't just appear, Emma. They find people brave enough to believe they deserve them." Outside, the sunlight blazed brighter than it had in months. Inside her, for the first time, everything felt alive. From the day she learned she was pregnant, Emma's world changed. She woke earlier, switched her morning coffee for orange juice, practiced slow breathing, wrote in her journal, and each night spoke softly to the life growing inside her. Ethan became the busiest man in Seattle, busy taking care of her. He bought books, learned recipes for expectant mothers, installed safety bars in the shower, and even downloaded a pregnancy app on his phone. Every morning, he'd grin and say, "Today our baby's the size of a grape." Ugh. Emma laughed, resting her hand on her belly. "I think she can hear you." By August, the weather had softened. The gallery still ran smoothly, but Emma spent more time painting her canvases now filled with sunlight, skies, and laughing children. Ethan often stood behind her quietly, a hand resting on her shoulder. "I've never seen you this beautiful," he'd whisper. One afternoon, an email appeared in her inbox from Richard B. at blakecorp.com. Her hand trembled. He hadn't reached out once since the divorce papers. The message was brief, just 4 words. "I need to see you." No signature, no explanation, just cold words on a bright screen. Ethan read it, then looked at her. "Do you want to see him?" She shook her head. "Not now." He nodded. "That's the right choice." But that night, she couldn't sleep. Not out of fear, but because the doctor's voice still echoed, "The problem was never yours." Of lo, if that was true, then Richard had condemned her for a sin that was never hers. Days later, at her next checkup, Dr. Wells smiled and pointed to the screen. "The baby's heartbeat is strong. Everything's right on track." Emma stared at the pulsing light. A tear slipped down her cheek. Ethan squeezed her hand. "That's our child." She laughed softly through tears. "It's hard to believe this body, the one they called broken, could do this." "No, Emma," he said. "It was never broken, just hurt by the wrong words." She leaned into him, and for the first time in her life, she felt peace, even as she cried. That night, they sat on the balcony. The breeze carried salt from the bay and the scent of lavender from her small garden. Ethan draped a blanket over her shoulders and placed his hand gently on her belly. "You know," he murmured, "I think the baby's a girl." "Why?" she asked, smiling. "Because she's strong, gentle, and has a heart like her mother's." End of sec. "And if it's a boy, then he'll learn from his father how to love a woman like his mother." Emma went quiet, tears glinting in her eyes. In that moment, it felt as though every old wound was quietly healing. She turned to him, whispering, "Thank you for teaching me to believe in love again." He kissed her softly, the touch as light as breath. Outside, the city lights shimmered across the water, thousands of tiny reflections, like miracles glowing in the night. The same light now blooming inside the woman who had once believed she wasn't meant for happiness. February in Seattle was cold, but Emma and Ethan's apartment was always filled with light. The Christmas tree still stood in the corner, its tiny lights glowing each night. On the table lay Emma's sketches, this time not of storms or sorrow, but of color, sunlight, flowers, and a small hand she had once thought she would never hold. Her belly had grown round, her steps slower, but her eyes shimmered with quiet joy. Ethan was always beside her, walking with her around the lake every morning, reading aloud to her and the baby every night. Sometimes, Emma woke in the middle of the night, hand resting over her stomach, listening to that tiny, steady heartbeat. The sound made her cry because never, not once, had she believed she could create something so miraculous. Ethan would tease her, whispering, "It's our son. I told you. You sound so sure." Of course, he kicks too hard to be a girl. Or maybe he's like his mom, stubborn and won't listen to anyone. Then I'd better be careful. 2 strong women in one house. Their laughter filled the room, warmer than any fire. By March, the snow had melted. Emma moved more slowly but glowed brighter. She spent her days reading about motherhood, sketching memories, and helping prepare the nursery. Ethan had painted the walls a pale yellow, built a wooden crib, and hung a handmade mobile of white clouds above it. "I made that," he said proudly. "Not perfect, but solid." "Like your love," she teased. He smiled, taking her hand. "And yours." One morning, as they shopped for baby clothes downtown, Emma stopped in front of a tiny knitted sweater, her eyes wide with wonder. "Look at this, Ethan. It's so small. I still can't believe it." He watched her softly. "I believed from the beginning. You just needed time to catch up." Then from somewhere behind a voice, deep and achingly familiar, "Emma?" She turned. Richard Blake. He no longer looked like the man she once knew, his hair streaked with grey, his face drawn, his eyes uncertain and stunned as they dropped to her pregnant belly. What is this?" he stammered. Ethan instinctively stepped forward, protective. "Who are you?" Richard gave a cold, bitter laugh. "Who do you think? I'm her ex-husband." The air thickened. Shoppers began to glance over. Emma's hand tightened around Ethan's. "Let's go," she said quietly. Richard blocked their way. "No, Emma. I want to know what's inside you. Whose is it?" Ethan tensed, but Emma didn't flinch. She met Richard's eyes, her voice calm and steady. "It's mine. And his. The man who actually loves me." "One?" Richard's face drained of color. You can't have children." You were wrong," she interrupted gently, her tone soft but sharp as glass. "You were wrong all along." Murmurs spread through the store. Someone lifted a phone to record. Ethan stepped closer, placing himself between them. "I think you should leave, Richard. And who the hell are you to tell me that? I'm the man who stood by her when you threw her out into the rain." Richard froze, his expression hardened, then twisted with anger. "Are you trying to humiliate me, Emma?" "No, Richard," she said softly. "I'm just finally being honest, something you never dared to be." She walked away, Ethan's hand steady in hers. In the reflection of the glass door, they appeared side by side, walking toward the light, while behind them, his shadow disappeared into the crowd. That night, the video of their encounter went viral on social media. The caption read, "The woman once called Barren now pregnant and radiant." Thousands of comments poured in, cheering her on. Emma read a few, tears blurring her vision. She didn't crave attention, only peace. And at last, the truth had spoken for itself. Ethan touched her hand gently. "Sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from people's hearts." She nodded. "I'm not afraid anymore. Not of him, not of the past, not even of myself." He squeezed her fingers. "Because you've become the light, Emma." A week later, the first spring breeze swept through Seattle. Emma woke to a strange tightening in her stomach. She frowned, steadying herself. Ethan rushed over from the kitchen. "What's wrong?" "I think it's time." His eyes widened. "Now? Really?" "Probably. In a few hours." He scrambled to grab the hospital bag they'd packed 2 weeks earlier, fumbling so much they both burst into laughter. On the way to the hospital, the sky was cloudless. Sunlight poured through the windows, painting Emma's face in gold. She turned to Ethan and smiled. "Are you scared?" he asked. "No. Just ready." "Me too." The labor lasted more than 10 hours. Emma was exhausted, hair damp with sweat, but Ethan never let go of her hand. "You're doing amazing," he whispered. "You're the strongest person I know," she gasped, clutching his hand. "Ethan, if something happens, don't say that. Nothing's going to happen. I'm here. I'm not leaving." Out. Under the harsh hospital lights, she thought of all those nights 2 decades ago crying alone, thinking she was a mistake in God's design. Now, she was bringing life into the world, proof that her body had never been broken, only buried under someone else's cruelty. And then, the sound came, a single cry, piercing and new. The room stilled. The nurse placed a tiny, red-faced baby on her chest. A boy. Breathing strongly, Ethan's tears fell freely as he kissed her forehead. "You did it, Emma." She looked down at the baby, her voice shaking with joy. "Hello, my love. Noah." Noah Miller, the name they chose, meant peace after the storm. 3 days later, they brought him home. Sunlight filled the apartment. Flowers covered every surface. Emma stood by the window, cradling Noah, watching the sky spread wide and blue. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around them both. "I still can't believe it," he whispered. "Believe what?" she asked. "That the woman once called Barren is the one who gave life to a miracle." Emma smiled, tears glimmering. "Maybe I was just planted in the wrong soil, Ethan. In that old place, I withered. But here, I bloomed." He held her closer. "And I promise, I'll keep the sun shining on this garden." She rested her head on his shoulder. Outside, Seattle glowed with honeyed light across the water. A chapter had closed, and from the ground once called barren, a flower had finally bloomed. Seattle slipped into June, the kind of summer where the daylight lingered until nearly 8. In their 27th floor apartment, Emma Hayes, now Emma Miller, was rocking baby Noah to sleep. He was 6 months old now, with Ethan's blue eyes and her soft brown hair. The lullaby hummed low in her throat, warm and steady, the voice of someone who had survived storms and learned to treasure quiet. She laid Noah in his crib and turned. Ethan stood in the doorway, smiling. "I swear he falls asleep the moment he hears your voice. Or maybe because you wore him out this afternoon." I admit defeat, Ethan laughed. Our son has endless energy. They both laughed. The sound filled the apartment, simple, gentle, almost too perfect. Sometimes, that frightened Emma. Happiness, this pure, felt fragile, like glass that might shatter under the wrong touch. But Ethan always reminded her, "You deserve this peace, Emma. Don't doubt it." She believed him, but she couldn't stop the unease that sometimes crept in, especially after that Seattle Herald article appeared. Businessman Richard Blake announces his return after personal scandal. The photo showed Richard on a stage, thinner, older, haunted. His eyes looked like someone devoured by his own past. Emma's hands trembled as she read. Ethan, reading over her shoulder, placed a hand on her arm. "He has no power over you anymore. Don't let him haunt you again. Hold." "I'm not afraid of him, Ethan," she whispered. "I just don't want to feel pity when I see him fall." He studied her face for a long moment. "Sometimes kindness," he said softly, "means refusing to let someone drag you back into the dark. But the past always knows how to find its way home." One evening, while Emma was tidying Noah's toys, the doorbell rang. Ethan was still at work. She opened the door. No one was there, only a rush of cold air. On the floor, a thick envelope. Inside, a photo. Her, Ethan, and Noah are walking by the lake. On the back, scrawled in uneven handwriting, "My child, isn't it?" Her blood ran cold. She clutched Noah to her chest, her breath caught in her throat. Someone had been watching. When Ethan came home, she handed him the photo. His jaw tightened, his face darkened. "He's crossed a line," Ethan said. "I'm calling our lawyer." "No," she whispered. "If we react, he'll think he still has power over me." Emma," Ethan said, voice steady but sharp, glancing at their sleeping son. "This isn't just about you anymore. You're my wife and the mother of my child. I won't let anyone make you afraid again." Her tears came before she could stop them, but deep down, she knew this wasn't over. 3 days later, an email arrived. "We need to talk. One last time, Richard." Ethan was against it, but Emma knew if she didn't face him, he'd never stop. She agreed to meet at the office of her attorney, Amanda Cole, the same woman who'd helped her in the divorce. That day, Seattle wept again. It always seemed to rain when Emma had to confront her past. She arrived in a long coat, calm but alert. Amanda was already seated, professional and unflinching. Across the table sat Richard. He looked worn thinner, eyes bruised by sleeplessness, hair unkempt, but the old arrogance still flickered faintly there. "You look different," he said. "How so?" "Like someone happy," he sneered. "But I don't believe it'll last." Emma's voice was steady. "You came here to say that?" "I came to ask whose child it is," Amanda interjected. "Mr. Blake, Mrs. Miller is under no obligation to answer. Any further disrespect, and this meeting ends." He ignored her, eyes locked on Emma. "I once loved you, Emma, but you made me a laughingstock. The city thinks I'm the problem." "Because you are," she said quietly, each word cutting clean. "You destroyed me with your words for 20 years. Now that the truth is out, you can't stand it." He slammed his hand on the table, standing abruptly. Security moved closer. "You'll pay for this," he hissed. "I won't let this go." Emma rose too, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You had your chance to keep me, Richard. You chose to lose me. I don't hate you, but I'll never let you hurt me again. I have a son, a life, and a man who knows what love means." She turned and walked out. Outside, the rain poured, but she no longer felt cold. That night, she told Ethan everything. He sat silently, the lamplight painting deep lines of restraint across his face. "He won't stop," Ethan said finally. "Men who lose everything often cling to hate as the only thing left." "I know," she whispered, "but at least I'm not afraid to face him anymore." He took her hand. "You're stronger than you think, Emma." She smiled faintly. "No, I'm just tired of being afraid." They sat in silence. Outside, Seattle glowed against the night sky, while inside, a quiet shadow stirred unseen, but felt by them both. A week later came the news. Richard had filed a lawsuit accusing her of fraud and defamation. The story spread fast. Headlines flared. "Once," called Barren woman sued by ex-husband. Reporters camped outside their building. Cameras flashed. Emma stayed calm. Ethan burned with anger. "I want to take you and Noah somewhere away from this mess," he said. She shook her head. No, I've been running for 20 years. I'm done running. Ethan said nothing more. He saw it, the quiet fire in her eyes. She was no longer the Emma Hayes who trembled in the rain. The day of the hearing arrived beneath a sky heavy with grey. Emma wore a white suit, hair neatly pinned, her face bare of everything but resolve. Ethan held her hand as they waited outside the courtroom. "I'm here," he whispered. "Always," she answered. Inside, Richard sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, his eyes following her every step filled with bitterness and ruin. His lawyer spoke first, but Amanda countered calmly and precisely. Then came the evidence. A sealed medical report confirming that Richard Blake had been infertile from birth. The courtroom fell silent. Richard's face went pale. Amanda's voice was clear. "For 20 years, my client, Mrs. Emma Miller, suffered humiliation and emotional abuse. Today, the truth is undeniable. The person incapable of conceiving was not her, but the plaintiff." Flashbulbs erupted. Murmurs swept through the crowd. The judge struck the gavel. Case dismissed. Emma exhaled, trembling. Ethan squeezed her hand, his own voice thick. "It's over, Emma. Finally over." She turned once to look at Richard. He sat hunched, his head in his hands, a man crushed by the weight of his own lies. She said softly, "I don't hate you anymore, but I'll never forget what it took to learn how to live again." Then she walked out of the courtroom, her chin high. Outside, the rain had stopped. For the first time in a long while, sunlight broke over Seattle, as if the city itself was breathing with her. After the trial, Seattle's headlines exploded. Richard Blake, once a celebrated businessman, loses lawsuit to ex-wife. The truth behind a 20-year marriage built on lies. Every outlet carried the story. Photos of Richard slumped in the courtroom spread across social media. People called him a liar, a man too proud to face himself. The tragedy of male ego. In his luxury penthouse downtown, Richard sat alone before the window, half a glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. The room was a wreck. Empty bottles, papers scattered, blinds half drawn. The city lights glimmered, but none of them touched him. The world outside moved on. He didn't. His phone buzzed non-stop: reporters, investors, old friends. He shut it off and threw it to the floor. "They all betrayed me," he muttered, voice cracked. "Every damn one of them." On the table lay a photo of Emma cradling Noah in the hospital, eyes bright, alive. He traced her face with his thumb, whispering, "You think you can escape me, Emma. You can't have happiness without me." Meanwhile, Emma and Ethan's lives had found their rhythm again. Their art gallery, the Harbor Light, was thriving. Emma's painting, First Dawn, had just been chosen for an exhibit in San Francisco. It would be her first trip away from Noah. "I already miss him," she said, smiling softly, holding her boarding pass. "I miss you already," Ethan teased. They laughed together, unaware that back in Seattle, a shadow was beginning to stir. Richard hired a private investigator to gather photos, schedules, and any details of Emma's life. He told himself he wasn't trying to hurt her, he just wanted to see her again. To hear her voice, he mumbled into the darkness. "Then maybe I can breathe again." But night after night, his reason eroded. He started driving to her building, parking outside, staring up at the lit window on the 27th floor. Through the glass, he sometimes saw her silhouette holding Noah, laughing with Ethan. Light filled that home, and it burned him. "She used to belong to me." The words looped in his mind until they became a haunting chant. One night, Emma heard something outside the apartment door. Ethan was asleep. She picked up Noah, opened the door, no one there. Just an envelope on the mat. Inside, a wedding ring. Their wedding ring. The same one Richard had thrown to the floor 20 years ago. A note in jagged handwriting. "We're not finished." Her whole body trembled. She clutched Noah tight. When Ethan woke and saw the note, his face hardened. "Enough," he said quietly but firmly. "Tomorrow, I'm calling the police." "Ethan, if Emma, he's crossed the line. You're not alone in this anymore." He installed security cameras, alerted the police, and hired a private guard for the building. Emma tried to stay calm, but every night, she swore she could feel Richard's eyes watching from the dark. Days later, her phone rang an unknown number. "Emma," his voice hoarser, unsteady. "What do you want, Richard?" "Just to talk. Once. Please." "There's nothing left to say." "You've changed," he rasped. Cold. Like him. But I don't hate you, Emma. I can't stand that you're happy without me. Her throat tightened. You need help, Richard. You're not well. No, Emma, you're not well. You think you can erase me, but no one forgets me. She hung up, hand shaking. Ethan came out of the bedroom and wrapped his arms around her. Don't be afraid, he whispered. He's already falling. 2 weeks later, Richard was arrested for trespassing and harassment. The security footage showed him standing outside their apartment at midnight, soaked in rain, clutching a photo of Emma, Ethan, and Noah. When the police arrived, he didn't resist, just stared ahead, murmuring, "She was mine." The story broke instantly. The final downfall of Richard Blake, the headlines read. Emma watched the news quietly, no anger, no satisfaction, just a hollow ache. She pitied him, a man who had let pride devour everything good inside him. Ethan turned off the TV. "You okay?" "I don't know," she said softly. "I don't hate him anymore. I feel empty." "You don't have to feel anything," he replied. "You just have to keep living." She nodded, gazing out at the rain-slick city. Seattle was crying again. A month later, the police called. Richard wanted to see her one last time. Ethan didn't want her to go. But she said, "If I don't look my past in the eye, I'll never truly walk away from it." The visiting room was small, cold, and fluorescent. Richard sat in handcuffs, hair streaked with grey, his eyes hollow. When he saw her, he gave a broken smile. "Emma, what do you want, Richard?" "Just one thing," he whispered. "Is the child happy?" She was silent for a long time. Then quietly, "Yes, very. And he'll never know the kind of pain you made me live with." He lowered his head, shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry," he murmured, barely audible. "I destroyed the only good thing I ever had." Emma looked at him for a long while, then said, "I don't need your apology. I need you to stop hurting people." She stood to leave. He looked up, tears streaking down his face. "You did love me once, didn't you?" "Yes," she said softly. "But that love died the night it rained." She walked out. The door clanged shut behind her, and in that sound, she knew the past was finally locked away. When she got home, Noah was asleep. Ethan was waiting on the balcony, lamplight brushing his shoulders. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I am now," she said, smiling faintly. He apologized. Ethan was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Maybe sometimes people only become better after they've lost everything." "And maybe," she replied, "peace only comes when you've learned to forgive but not forget." One. He took her hand, folding it into his. "I'm proud of you, Emma." She leaned her head against his shoulder. Outside, rain still fell over Seattle, soft, endless, but inside their home, the light glowed steady, chasing every shadow away. A year later, Seattle bloomed in summer. Green Lake shimmered beneath a sky so blue it felt newly born. In the small, sunlit house south of the city, Emma Miller packed her notes into a brown leather case. On the desk lay an invitation embossed in gold. Gala, Women of Courage, guest of honor and keynote speaker, Emma Miller. Ethan stepped in, Noah in his arms, the baby's hair a soft mess from sleep. "Someone wants to wish Mommy good luck," he said with a grin. Emma kissed Noah's forehead. "Thank you, my two favorite men." Ethan smiled. "You'll do great. You're not just telling your story tonight, you're telling the story of thousands." She looked at him, heart swelling with quiet awe. From a woman once broken to a woman standing before the world, it still felt like a dream. The gala glittered beneath the harbor lights. White silk streamed in the evening breeze. Cameras flashed, and guests whispered her name, Emma Miller. When she walked on stage, the applause roared. The spotlight caught her face, calm, radiant, unafraid. She began softly, her voice like breath after rain. "I was once a woman without a voice. For 20 years, I believed I had to endure pain to deserve love. I was wrong. None of us has to suffer to prove our worth." The hall fell still. Faces shimmered in the light, some tearful, all listening. I was called useless, barren. But the truth was, I was just planted in the wrong soil, and once placed in the right one, I bloomed. Applause erupted, waves of sound echoing off the high ceiling. Emma paused, feeling her heart tremble. She didn't speak of pain or of Richard by name. She spoke of forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's knowing the wound existed, but no longer letting it rule you. I learned that from the very person who once hurt me. The audience rose, clapping until the sound became a kind of music. Emma bowed, tears glinting not of sorrow, but of peace. After the ceremony, she stepped out onto the terrace. The wind from the bay was calm, carrying the faint scent of lavender and salt. She closed her eyes, breathing in freedom. Then she heard footsteps. When she turned, she froze. Richard Blake stood a few feet away. He was thinner, grayer, his face tired, but the arrogance was gone from his eyes. Beside him was Amanda, her former attorney, who nodded gently. He only wanted a few minutes. Emma gave a slight nod. Amanda stepped back. "Hello, Richard," she said evenly. He bowed his head, voice hoarse. "Thank you for seeing me. I just wanted to say one thing." She waited. He stared out toward the sea, his words trembling. "I've lost everything, the company, the name, my friends, even myself. But what haunts me isn't what I lost. It's you. Not because I loved you, maybe I never truly understood love, but because I realized I destroyed someone who never deserved it." Emma said nothing. The wind carried the smell of rain and regret. Richard went on, voice quiete. "You were right. I don't hate you, I hate myself. If I could go back, I'd be someone else. But I know it's too late." She looked at him sad, but without bitterness. "It's never too late to start again, Richard. You have to accept that not everyone can walk with you on that new path." He gave a small, weary smile. "I know. I just wanted to say sorry before I leave this city." She nodded. "Thank you for finally choosing truth over pride." He turned and walked away, his figure fading into the golden glow of the harbor lights. Emma stood there for a long time, her heart calm at last. Seattle was beautiful that night. No rain, only wind and the shimmer of light on water. The next morning, Emma woke to sunshine spilling through the curtains. Ethan was on the balcony, playing with Noah, their laughter rising like birdsong. She watched them quietly, filled with a peace she once thought she'd never find. Her phone buzzed a message from Amanda. "Richard left Seattle this morning. He asked me to give you this letter." The handwriting was shaky, familiar. "Emma, thank you for hearing me. I know no apology can undo what I've done, but if I could wish for one thing, it would be that your child grows up in a world kinder than the one I built, where no one is made to believe they are worthless. I'm leaving the country. Somewhere. No one knows my name. I'll learn how to be silent. Thank you for forgiving me without ever needing to say a word. Richard." Emma folded the letter gently. No tears came, only a quiet sense of release, like a stone lifted from her heart. She stepped onto the balcony. Ethan held Noah, pointing toward a cluster of sparrows perched on the railing. "See, buddy," he said. "Sometimes the smallest things are what freedom looks like." Emma smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I got a letter from Richard," she whispered. He nodded softly. "He apologized. I knew that day would come," Ethan said. "He needed forgiveness to find his own peace." Emma looked at Noah, his tiny fingers gripping hers. "I think we should teach him," she said, "that people make mistakes, but what matters is knowing when to stop. And that real love," Ethan added, "never makes someone afraid." They stood together, watching the sky. Clouds drifted lazily across the bright blue, sunlight dancing on the bay. Months later, Emma became a mentor at a support center for women who had endured emotional abuse. Each afternoon, she sat in a small room, listening to stories that sounded painfully familiar. She didn't give speeches, just told her own story. The rain, the cruelty, the night she finally chose light. And each time one of those women smiled again, Emma knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. One evening, as she left the center, rain began to fall. She stood beneath the awning, looking up. The drops glistened in the streetlight like falling shards of glass. She remembered the night 20 years ago, dragging her broken suitcase through the storm. Now, standing in the same kind of rain, she smiled. Ethan's car pulled up. He leaned out, umbrella in hand. "Raining again," he said. "Yeah," she laughed softly. "But I'm not afraid of it anymore." "I know, because now you've got someone to share it with." She took his hand and stepped into the car. Noah was asleep in the back seat, clutching his stuffed bear. They drove through the glowing streets, the city lights rippling across the wet glass. In the distance, lightning flickered faintly, but the rain was gentle now. Emma looked out the window and whispered, "After every storm, the light always returns. You have to be brave enough to wait." Ethan squeezed her hand, smiling, and in the soft rhythm of the rain, The story of the woman once called worthless came to rest. In the quiet light of life, forgiveness, and love. Seattle, early June. The sky was crystal clear, sunlight spilling over Elliott Bay. The city had entered its most beautiful season-long golden afternoons and cool evenings touched by the bay breeze. In a small house by the lake, Emma Miller was preparing for the 5th anniversary of her foundation, Light After the Storm, created to help women and children heal from emotional wounds. On the floor, 5-year-old Noah sat cutting colored paper for a card. "Daddy, did I spell love mommy right?" Ethan smiled. "Perfect. Add a heart, and it's done." Emma leaned against the doorway, watching the two of them. Sometimes she felt as if life was slowly giving her back every breath it had once taken away. She thought of the woman she used to be soaked in rain, dragging a broken suitcase through the dark streets. She was still in Seattle, but she was no longer alone. Ethan walked up behind her and wrapped his arms around her. "Can you believe how far you've come?" She smiled softly. "No, I just decided not to give up." That evening, the event hall glowed with warm light. Across the stage hung a banner that read, "The light never dies, as long as you believe it's still there." When Emma walked on stage, applause filled the room. Under the spotlight, her honey-brown hair shimmered, her expression calm and radiant. In the audience sat dozens of women she had helped, some holding children, some with old scars, but all with light in their eyes. "Years ago," Emma began, "I believed I had no worth. I lived as someone's shadow, convinced happiness was something I had to beg for. But I learned that worth doesn't come from who loves you. It comes from loving yourself enough to walk away when you're being hurt." The hall fell silent. She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "We are all fragments once broken, but our cracks don't make us weaker. They're where the light gets in." Applause erupted, echoing through the hall. When Emma lifted her gaze, she caught sight of a familiar face in the back row, gray hair, thin frame, eyes quiet. "Richard." For a heartbeat, she froze. Then she smiled, not in fear, but in peace. He sat still, his gaze no longer angry. When the audience rose to applaud, he bowed his head slightly, a final goodbye. And in that moment, she knew he had finally found his own kind of peace. Later that night, Emma and Ethan sat by the lake, city lights shimmering on the water. Ethan handed her a glass of wine. "You look like a queen up there tonight," he teased. She laughed. "A queen who still has to do the dishes." "I'll do them," he said. "You just sit here and enjoy your kingdom." They laughed together. The air smelled of grass and wildflowers. "I never thought my life could be this peaceful," she whispered. "You deserve it, Emma," Ethan said gently. "You walked through hell and came out with your kindness intact." She looked out across the lake. "I used to fear I'd never be loved for real, but you showed me love doesn't have to be perfect, just honest." He squeezed her hand. "And you taught me that strength isn't about never falling, it's about standing up again." Moonlight rippled across the water. Emma closed her eyes, listening to the rhythm of her own heartbeat, steady, alive, free. A year later, autumn returned to Seattle with soft rain. Emma took Noah to preschool. "Bye, Mommy, love you." "Love you too, sweetheart." And she stood watching him run inside, heart swelling with quiet joy. On her way home, she stopped at the cafe where she had first met Ethan all those years ago on that rainy night. Nothing had changed. The wooden tables, the scent of waffles, the gentle jazz. She sat by the window and ordered her usual, a cappuccino with no sugar. In the reflection of the glass, she saw a different woman, calm eyes, a soft smile, and a heart mended with love and forgiveness. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Congratulations, Emma. I'm far away, but I can still see your light. Thank you for not making me the last enemy in your story." "Oh." Emma smiled and didn't reply. She whispered, "Be at peace, Richard." That evening, Ethan came to pick her up. They walked together through Gasworks Park, the place where she had once cried alone in the rain. Now, it was covered in green grass and golden light, children running with kites in the wind. "Do you ever think," Ethan asked, "what if I hadn't stopped the car that night? Then I'd still be lost in the rain," she said, "and I'd still be searching for you." She turned to him and smiled. "We met at the right time, when both of us were broken enough to know what love really means." They sat together, watching the sunset dance on the water. Emma spoke quietly. "I was once called Barren, useless, unworthy of love. But now, If someone asks who I am, I'll say, I am a survivor, and I know how to love. Ethan brushed his hand against her cheek. You didn't just survive, Emma. You triumphed. A gust of wind lifted the fallen leaves. From across the park, Noah came running, waving a small kite. Mommy, look, I did it. Emma laughed, opening her arms wide. And in that moment, the Seattle sky blazed with light. Not the light after a storm, but the light of a woman who had found her own dawn. Epilogue. I was once called worthless, but I was waiting for the right person to see my worth. This was the journey of Emma Miller, the woman once called Barren, who ended up giving birth to a miracle. A new life, a new love, and the truth that light always returns to those brave enough to wait for it. If this story touched you, leave a dot or a comment to share your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of love, healing, and the women who rise again after the storm.